ended in failure. And meanwhile, the world situation has changed with the essential raw goal. But I think everybody is beginning to realize, and who don't want to change or move from the old imperialism, which they know, into the new imperialism, which has produced the situation that we see in Angola and Mozambique. They know, just as well as the Europeans, that a victory for the Patriotic Front would be to give up white minority government in favor of black minority government. And the politically conscious Africans in Rhodesia seem to me, from the talks I've had with some of their leaders, to judge that this would be out of the frying pan into a much hotter fire. Well, now, to prevent a victory of the Patriotic Front, the moderate black leaders in Rhodesia need cooperation with the European security forces. And that means with the European community. But equally, the Europeans need the blacks if they are to mobilize the resources of Rhodesia against the invader from outside, and if they are to get some form of international recognition. Now, it looks to me, I don't know, you know the situation better than I do, but that there might well be a basis here for an agreement between black and white in Rhodesia to defeat the onslaught of the new imperialism and simultaneously to work out a constitution which would enable majority rule to come into effect, while at the same time safeguarding the essential interests of the Europeans, who after all have made the major contribution in building up this country. I suppose this means an interim government in which power would be shared, leading on to a constitution and an election which would produce majority rule. And I would hope that, following the pattern of the Kissinger Agreement, that Britain certainly would raise sanctions if the interim government was formed, and would recognize, once the Constitution had been agreed and accepted, and it was clear that it provided for genuine majority rule. Africa is littered with constitutions, torn up at every side, but I would have thought that if the impartiality of the civil service and the security forces can be guaranteed, that they would be the arbiters of the situation, who would make sure that neither revolutionaries nor reactionaries upset whatever agreement was reached. Of course, such a settlement would not necessarily end the fighting. There are a large number of guerrillas in camps outside the country, and I don't think the Soviet Union will easily give up their bid to upset the situation in Rhodesia. On the other hand, I think they would be very cautious about escalating the conflict here once it was clear that Britain and the United States were in support of such a genuine majority rule government. Do you read Sherlock Holmes? He was a great believer in asking the question, why didn't the dog bark? And I asked myself, why, when a settlement between black and white within Rhodesia seems more on the cards than I've ever seen it before, in all the years I've been coming here, why are Owen and Vance against it? If they were to put their weight behind it, I have very little doubt that it would be agreed fairly speedily. Now, David Owen, of course, is a young man in a hurry. You may know more what they contain than I do. But you don't have to be very clued up to discover more or less which direction they're going in. It seems to me quite clear that there is no possibility of an agreement which will include the Patriotic Front, the Africans inside Rhodesia, and the Rhodesia Front. I don't think there's much chance of a deal between the Patriotic Front and Bishop Muzorewa unless it was on Patriotic Front terms. The Times of August the 15th, in its very interesting leading article, nothing is more difficult in politics than to force a settlement when conditions are not yet ready. I think they are probably very nearly ready internally. If they're not yet ready in London and Washington, then, if Catherine will forgive me for saying so, I think we ought to hold on for a change of wind in the West. I think it's coming in the United Kingdom. It won't be long before there's a Conservative government. In November, perhaps. May or June, I would have thought, very likely. If you're a betting man, you can make up your own mind. And when it comes, I think you will find a Conservative government takes a very different view of affairs in Southern Africa. John Davis, our Shadow Foreign Secretary, has already come out clearly in favour of the so-called internal solution, and he did so, if I'm not mistaken, the day after the Vance-Owen-Botha meeting. A Conservative government, having for constitutional reasons to take the lead in Rhodesia and having Britain having the greater interest in South African investment and trade, our voice would have to be listened to with considerable attention in Washington, and it would be a very different voice from the voice of Mr. Callaghan and Mr. Owen. Meanwhile,
are you hoping that Mr. Smith wins the election and wins it handsomely?
Need I express any hopes on this? It's not my affair. All I want to do is to see whoever is the accepted leader of the Europeans in Rhodesia negotiate with accepted leaders of the Africans.
What would the Conservative Party view be, sir, if the Rhodesian Action Party, with their three-tier system of government based loosely on the South African Homeland System, won this coming election?
Well, it would be very wrong of me to say anything that would be interpreted as interference in the election campaign here at the present time. And so I really can't, I don't think I ought to comment on that.
Could you